My face was melting, and I felt one with the world.
If there is a God of the universe, does this God speak to us through music and nature? Is he, she, it a God of good vibes? I just watched Alex O'Connor's interview of actor Rainn Wilson, best known as Dwight from The Office, about his recent book, Soul Boom. It's a great conversation. I loved it, about spirituality, the transcendent, the face of God, philosophy, and Wilson's life as part of the Baha'i faith. But something stuck out to me as wrong, something familiar that many of us have all wondered in this audience about these very big questions about God and existence. I'm going to share with you a response to Rainn Wilson and Alex O'Connor from beyond the grave, as it were, in the writings of Oxford Don and Christian apologist C.S. Lewis. It's an insight from C.S. Lewis's famous book, Mere Christianity, on whether we should limit our search for God to forests and oceans or Radiohead concerts. And I'll also touch on a key plot point from Star Wars The Last Jedi that relates to all of this. You're watching Geeky Stoics. Atheist YouTuber Alex O'Connor, formerly known as Cosmic Skeptic, is a man of Oxford University, and as such, seems to harbor an appreciation, as we do, of Oxford legend C.S. Lewis.
I keep quoting this poem by C.S. Lewis, and there's a point where he says, "Thoughts are but coins. Let me not trust instead of thee their thin-worn image of thy head." People often worship their thoughts more than they worship the thing that their thoughts are supposed to be directed to.
So I hope that this response video comes across as intended, which is to add to the conversation rather than be a dunk on O'Connor or Rainn Wilson, because what they're talking about is highly relatable.
A lot of secular humanists say, well, I don't understand God. I don't understand this sacred. But when I'm in the redwoods, I feel something closest akin to transcendence.
I have struggled my entire life to feel God, this God that everyone is always talking about, and experience transcendence. But I have felt it once or twice, and I have seen things that I can't explain. And I think Rainn Wilson is a lot like this.
When I experience God the most, I experience God in nature. I think the closest I've ever come to God was at a Radiohead concert. My face was melting and I felt one with the world, and I just felt love and ebullience and joy. This is like the most religious experience I've ever had.
You've probably heard this kind of talk before, particularly from the friends in your life who love to say things like they are spiritual but not religious. Maybe they celebrate the solstice and think Easter is lame, buy crystals and think of God as an energy or a force rather than an entity or an old man in the clouds. And look, I think that's totally fair, actually. It's a very appealing idea. But the weirdest thing happened to me personally. A few hours after listening to Wilson and O'Connor, I picked up C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity for a pleasure read, and I opened it to a random page, and boom, there it is, a response about Rainn Wilson's God of good vibes. I remember once when I had been giving a talk to the English Royal Air Force, an old hard-bitten officer got up and said, "I know there's a God. I've felt him out alone in the desert at night. The tremendous mystery. And that's just why I don't believe all your neat little dogmas and formulas about him. To anyone who's met the real thing, they all seem so petty and pedantic and unreal." The RAF pilot is rejecting religious constructs of God, the Christian God of the church. It's a common view we've all heard before, and I remember personally, I heard it in 2009 when I was in college. I met this very kind old man at a coffee shop, and he expressed that same view, a belief in God because he'd felt him in the woods of western North Carolina. But he loathed the church and its history of corruption. And I followed that man's lead, and I learned a lot from him. But over time, I just got more lost, and I'll explain why. But first, C.S. Lewis continues, "Now, in a sense, I quite agreed with that man. I think he had probably a real experience of God in the desert. And when he turned from that experience to the Christian creeds, I think he really was turning from something real to something less real." This part is really important because so much of C.S. Lewis's work in the Chronicles of Narnia, which he's most famous for, has to do with the defining of reality. Narnia is much more like a kid-friendly notion of what the Matrix trilogy was getting at. which is that the existence we think of as the real world might be less real than we think. Narnia is not a dream or a kind of magical kingdom. It's the truth. The truth. It's more real than London or the streets of New York. So after conceding that an experience in nature might be more close to God than a morning in church, Lewis says, "In the same way, if a man has once looked at the Atlantic from the beach and then goes and looks at a map of the Atlantic, he also will be turning from something real to something less real, turning from real waves to a bit of colored paper. But here comes the point. The map is admittedly only colored paper, but there are two things you have to remember about it. In the first place, it is based on what hundreds and thousands of people have found out by sailing the real Atlantic. In that way, it has behind it masses of experience just as real as the one you could have from the beach. Only while yours would be a single glimpse, the map fits all those different experiences together. If you want to go anywhere, the map is absolutely necessary. As long as you are content with walks on the beach, your own glimpses are far more fun than looking at a map. But the map is going to be more use than walks on the beach if you want to get to America." This connects somewhat to why Rainn Wilson is a Baha'i. The Baha'i faith basically treats all the world's religions and spirituality as part of the bigger truth. He calls it the continuous revelation, not to be confused with Mao's communist principle of continuous revolution, basically arguing that every faith has touched God's face and contributed a piece of the puzzle in some way. And just to be crystal clear, when Lewis is referring to the map of the ocean, he's referring to theology or church doctrine, and being on the beach, actually touching water and having it wash over your feet. That is Rainn Wilson's God in nature, or the Radiohead concert that he describes. Lewis had thought like Rainn Wilson at earlier stages in his life, but something that appears throughout his work is a skepticism of spiritual thrill-seeking without work, sacrifice, or duties to God. He doesn't believe God is indifferent or can exist if he doesn't have laws. That's something that we touched on a bit in this video about Star Wars and the theory of natural law. And speaking of Star Wars, this tension between dogma, religious texts, and genuine spirituality is a hinge point of Episode VIII, The Last Jedi. When Rey is about to leave Luke Skywalker's island on Ahch-To and Luke is going to set fire to his tree/library, Yoda does it for him. Luke thinks that the ancient Jedi texts are inside burning.
The sacred Jedi texts. Ooh.
And Yoda suggests that they're just a pile of old books.
Page turners, they were not. Wisdom they held, but that library contained nothing that the girl Rey does not already possess.
There are two messages here. One, director Rian Johnson is saying that Luke has gotten too precious and attached to his ancient text, and he needs to return to being in communion with the Force. But it's also true that Rey stole the books, and they never were really burned in the first place. So she will have that ancient wisdom, the map of the Atlantic, if you will, as she goes forward in her journey. I don't like this movie very much. It's sort of a have your cake and eat it too kind of message, but that's neither here nor there. What's puzzling to me about Rainn Wilson and the Baha'i faith, though, and it's something that I wish O'Connor had challenged him on, is what does Rainn Wilson have to give up socially or within himself to follow this particular version of God? Does he have any sort of cost associated with it? I'm looking at this as a cookie-cutter American Protestant, and it's possible that I have this deeply ingrained notion of God as always demanding sacrifices, both small and large. But I think there's something wrong when you're promoting a soul boom, and your most deep spiritual moment that you can describe is a Radiohead concert, where you're wrapped in euphoria, pleasure, and good vibes of a crowd. So let's look at two more passages from Lewis to wrap this up. Doctrines are not God. They are only a kind of map. But that map is based on the experiences of hundreds of people who really were in touch with God, experienced, compared with which any thrills or pious feelings you and I are likely to get on our own are very elementary and very confused. Like Rainn Wilson, I have been touched while listening to music in ways that I can't describe. I remember very specifically being at a summer youth retreat for my church in Colorado when I was 16. I was very closed off, I was very stubborn, and I was not feeling what this worship group wanted me to feel, and I kind of resented it. Then for some reason, they decided to go secular, and they started playing a stripped-down version of Linkin Park's Numb. And by the end of the song, I was in tears. I was lying on the ground, praying for help about my parents' divorce and my feelings of anger and depression and resentment. And like Alex O'Connor says,
I saw this like meme going around atheist Twitter for a while, which was people saying like, I used to think that I was really religious and I was feeling the Holy Spirit, but turns out I just liked music. I just liked concerts. It just pushes the problem back. Well, why are you moved by music? There's still this great mystery as to why that vibration in the air of a particular sort of frequency can bring up very specific emotions in you.
The burden of proof isn't necessarily on religious people, it's also on atheists to try and describe what this power is. I am very connected to music through my whole family, and I've always been able to feel music physically when a song is connecting with me. I will actually get a tingle up my spine and my arm hairs will stand on end when I hear a certain note or a frequency. And like Lewis says elsewhere in his catalog, it might be because God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts at us in our pains. Here's the end of Lewis's passage. If you want to get any further, you must use the map. What happened to that man in the desert may have been real and was exciting, but nothing comes of it. It leads nowhere. There is nothing to do about it. In fact, that is why a vague religion all about feeling God and nature and so on is so attractive. It is all thrills and no work, like watching waves from the beach. I don't think that means that doctrinal Muslims or Christians or Jews or whatever are all wellsprings of giving and charity all the time, but these are at least things that are demanded of them in writing, in the map of the Atlantic, and passed down over centuries through a map composed by fellow travelers in the form of these religious texts. And I'm sure that Rainn Wilson's Baha'i religion has compelled him toward empathy and doing many, many good works for people. But there's something here that seems to be missing, a deeper reality about God and his world. And I really do hope that one day Rainn Wilson and O'Connor are one day able to find that. I don't think that I have found it yet either. My perspective is that I do have a map. I believe in the map, and I'm out to sea. I am off the beach. I'm no longer thrill-seeking with the sand between my toes, and I'm sailing through storms. I hope, maybe, that the mystic island that I'm looking for is just beyond the next wave. Thanks for watching Geeky Stoics. I'm Stephen Kent. You can like and subscribe to this video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment. We really want you to be part of the discussion here about these weighty issues. So do chime in. We'll be sure to respond, and get connected with us deeper at geekystoics.com. We'll see you next time.